Well, it's that time again, Sunday, and you're at Steve's place. And and this week we have Dr. Lucian Ionescu coming, and he'll be speaking. He's a professor of mathematics at Illinois State University. And he'll be speaking about gravity and energy. But before that starts, let's talk about our upcoming conference. The 2022 Extraordinary Technology Conference, which will be from August 10th to 14th in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our phone number there to register is 520-463-1994. We cover everything: Tesla technology, alternative energy, medicine, gravity control. And some of the speakers we'll have will be like, George Weissman and Del Pond and Michael Lees are just a few, And we'll be posting up a new list come Monday. But for those who sign up for or become a YouTube exclusive members, you will be able to get an additional 5% off our 25% discount. So it'll be 30% off if you become a member before April 30th. Memberships are $9.99, and it gives you access to thousands of conference DVDs. Exotic research conferences, global sciences, and all the extraordinary technology conferences. So without any further ado, we're going to go to our guest, Lucian. Welcome aboard, Lucian.
Good evening.
Lucian, like I said, is from the Illinois State University. I'll be speaking on gravity and cold fusion. So, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'll start saying that I was thinking about understanding gravity for the last maybe 50 years and the other fundamental forces. And finally, I had a breakthrough a year ago and understood that gravity is not a fundamental force. It's a byproduct of the electroweak force from Standard Model, or more precisely, from the fractional electric charge of the quark structure of neutrons and protons. With this, there are there's actually only one fundamental force, which is an extension of electromagnetism and governed by the SU2 group of symmetry, but this a little bit later. And then I realized that this new approach based on elementary particles structure of matter may explain also cold fusion. So this is the topic. So these are the topics from tonight's presentation. Gravity appears as a very weak perturbation of what we usually call electromagnetism. And this comes from assumption that universe reality is not a continuum, but rather has a discrete symmetry. And then when we force this discrete symmetry, we get a Platonic symmetry. Now, with this being said, if we align the nuclear spin directions, this will allow to control this residual force. And not only that, but also allows to control the electrostatic repulsion of protons in nuclei, making possible cold fusion. So these are two consequences with huge implications. Of course, this is the theoretical side of the picture. The question is how to achieve this at the engineering level. So let's start first to understand gravity control. I mentioned that the so-called special unitary group in 2 dimensions with complex coefficients is the so-called gauge group of the electroweak force in the standard model. This may be unfamiliar to some of the viewers, so just keep in mind that SU2 it's essentially the group of rotations in 3 dimensions. That's why when we consider finite subgroups, we get cyclic groups, binary point groups, which are related to tetrahedral, cubic, and icosahedral symmetry, which give the Platonic solids, and the pictures are on the right side. So think spheres with nodes and orbits corresponding to the rotations of the finite subgroup of rotations. The implications at the physical level are as follows. Think of the sphere with Platonic nodes as an analog of electron orbitals. And for baryonic states, they control the baryonic states, and we're primarily interested in neutron, proton, and some other not so common elementary particles, sigmas, and so on. So assuming finite subgroups of symmetry, namely these Platonic symmetry groups, has also very important consequence explaining why there are only 3 generations of fermions and why also there are only 6 quark flavors of quarks in the standard model. This is a totally new, say, fact, breakthrough at the level of standard model, in other words, elementary particle physics. Now we will be interested in protons and neutrons, so I'll just mention that the proton is made out of the quarks up, up, down, and that the neutron, which is considered electrically neutral, is made out of the up, down, and down quarks. Think of this as I said, 3D bubbles with nodes from where the electric flow emanates, or if it's a sink, gets into the corresponding particle. The electron is an orbital cloud around the proton, in hydrogen, for instance. So it's not a point. The main uptake from this is that the theory of electric charges and electric force from classical physics does not apply here, because the sources, positive and negative, are not pointwise. They are these complex structures with fractional electric charges. Just a comment since we get here, talking about fermion generations, quark flavors correspond to the 2 dual geometries of tetrahedral, octahedral, and icosahedral Platonic symmetries. There are 5 of them, but grouped in pairs of 2, where tetrahedron is self-dual, so it's drawn just one time, while cube and octahedron are dual to each other, and they correspond to one generation, the second generation, and finally icosahedron and dodecahedron corresponds to the third generation as geometries of the quarks constituents. So this corresponds to the 6 flavors rendered in the figure from the left. So leaving behind this theory of elementary particles, which in some sense upgrades the standard model, let's talk about gravity resulting from the structure of elementary particles, essentially proton and neutron, in terms of quarks. Now, since this is a quantum level, this is indeed rightfully called quantum gravity, and it's totally different from what usually the term refers to. And quantum gravity usually is associated with models of the universe, not models of the local structure of matter. Now, neutrons, as I said, made out of up, down, down quarks, has an electric structure, has an electric charge which has a structure, namely a plus 2/3 and 2 negative 1/3. If we picture the neutron in the ground state as having the cubical symmetry, then you can think of the plus 2/3 emanating out from the top and bottom faces of the cube, while the negative 1/3 getting into the cube through the side faces. It's very important to get this point and compare it with the usual picture of a pointwise charge. But here the pointwise charge would be 0, would have 0 charge, because the total charge of the plus 2 and minus 1 would be 0. So in classical physics, the neutron would be neutral, but here it has a structure, and there is a flow into the neutron and going out of the neutron too, with the total flux 0. Regarding the proton, we have 2 fractional charges of plus 2/3 and 1 of negative 1/3. So a similar discussion can be made in connection with the cubical symmetry. And again, the flow of electric charge is not the one expected for a pointwise charge, and it's not rotationally symmetric, so it doesn't stream out of the point in all directions in the same way, but has a anisotropic structure with, let's say, a dominance of the incoming electric lines of force. But in one direction, there is actually 2 outgoing and 1 incoming, So there is a lack of angular symmetry when we look at these electric lines of force. From the mathematical point of view, protons and neutrons have such Platonic symmetries, with the three quarks determining a three-dimensional frame. From the physics point of view, the electric charges of these three quarks in neutrons, for instance, are sources and sinks of the electric lines of force, and these charges do not just add up to 0 or +1 as for the proton, but have a residual component that is gravity. Let's understand this part better and see how gravity for proton and neutron emerges. The proton with those fractional charges can be thought of as a uniform 2/3 of plus charges, +1. And this first part would be totally isotropic and represented by a Coulomb electric force field. But then there is an additional contribution, subtracting a positive, say, charge in the third direction of one of the quarks, which gives a preferred direction with a slightly stronger force, which turns out to be the candidate for gravity. Hence, the proton can, in the standard model, can be thought of as the pointwise proton times the 2 factor, which is rotationally symmetric, minus a, if you want, like a pole kind of force oriented in one of the 3 directions. The claim is that in this way, the proton in the standard model is or gives electromagnetism and gravity as a slight correction to the electromagnetic picture. Similarly, for the neutron, we have those 3 quarks down, up, with 1/3 of -1, -1 +2. And we have a Coulombian force, which is negative going in, and then positive a flow of electric charge in just one direction. Again, we have a complex structure of lines of force, but for which the total flow is 0. Therefore, from in first approximation, and it looks like it's neutral from the electric point of view. So again, the neutron in the standard model can be thought of as like a negative proton with a compensating positive, let's call it graviton again. But this graviton is not the one from some models which is supposed to be a boson, but rather a you should think of it as a fermion itself. This is obviously a qualitative analysis, and we don't have some actual constants which hopefully should be related with the universal constant of gravity. in a more mathematical analysis of the corresponding flows. Now, here I included a slide where you can compare gravity emerging in the general relativity with our picture here, which emerges from the elementary structure of matter. So general relativity, it's a model of the universe, while here our model is just refers to the elementary particles. So it's a local lab model, if you want, an important contrast. But when we look at the electric lines of force, then one can see that this combination of charges with the direction, with the corresponding directions, is similar to the picture corresponding to how gravity emerges in general relativity. Think of the cube and the faces where you have some incoming lines of force and some outgoing lines of force. The first one would be negative, the second would be positive. I also want to emphasize that general relativity with Einstein's equation can be thought of as a deformation of the Euclidean metric due to the tensor of momentum energy. So let's retain that general relativity is in some sense a deformation theory based on the deformation of the metric. Now, as a nice comment, this notation suggests a relation with Paul Laviolette's subquantum kinetics, where he thinks of systems made out of let's say three subparticles or vectors x, y, g, where one of them is responsible for gravity. But Paul Laviolette's theory does not refer or relate explicitly enough with the standard model, and is just a good intuition of a phenomenon which turns out to yield gravity. Now, there is a way to define a unified field theory, and I'm not going to talk much about that here. So I'll just mention that if you consider general vector fields, then the sources and sinks can, in 3 dimensions, can have different structures and so-called indexes. So a 3 zeros such source is rotationally symmetric and corresponds to a Coulombian field, for example, the electric charge, the positive electric charge. The 0, 3 would be the electric negative charge. And finally, the 2, 1 and 1, 2, the other two possible types of indexes in general of a vector field, corresponds to what we had before for neutrons and protons, where there is an anisotropic distribution of the lines of electric force. So the conclusion is that the general mathematical theory of vector fields allows for exactly these types of forces. The first and the fourth is electromagnetism, the two electric charges, while the second and third is what we see in the standard model and combines electric charge and gravity. More about this you can see in an article, qubit model, which can be found at my ISU research page. Also, more about this unified field theory can be found in the archive, one of the two, the VIXRA, I think. Now, let's go back to directions. So protons and neutrons directions have different properties. Then the main point is that if we reorient the spin directions, we change the direction of gravity for that elementary particle. So retain this important fact that gravity is not uniform as in classical theories, but it points in a specific direction. Let's call that the gravity attraction vector. Now, the overall gravitational force of a mass is due to the random orientations of this and appears normally isotropic with a tiny bias from the fact that two bodies, when they approach each other, break the symmetry, the rotational symmetry. So this bias would be from one center to the other body's center. What results should be, I say here, is Newton's law for universal attraction, but the mathematical proof for this is not yet present. Now, Frederick Alzofon, a physicist who worked in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, anticipated this origin of gravity from some quantum effects. And he stated that dynamic nuclear orientation of the spin directions will affect gravitational attraction between bodies. And it's remarkable that he experimentally verified this. So again, I'm pausing. He was able to affect the weight of a body in his experiments, showing that gravity it's not a fixed universal force, as the classical theory says, but rather is a byproduct of these directions of spin, and that it can be controlled, manipulated. More specifically, it can be reduced so the body eventually can weigh much less and lift. As we know, it's the case with UFOs, for instance. Regarding Alzofon experiments of gravity control, I'll just mention that it was used a microwave pulsing beam which acts like a laser to pump the electrons aligned in the magnetic field at a specific frequency called the Larmor resonance frequency. So the electrons are pumped and by this microwave pulsing beam, and they couple with the protons and neutrons spins, and there is a transfer which orients them in a direction corresponding to the magnetic field, ambient magnetic field. This leads to an inversion of population of energetic states. The lower one corresponds to gravity, but the moment we increase that level to the next one corresponding to gravity, we just nullify it at some level, because again there is a chaotic change of directions in general in the nuclei. So only a certain percentage of the constituents of the nuclei would have the right direction. Now, a very, intriguing point is that this data for the microwave pulse was taken from actually a UFO, which was chased by US Air Force aircraft with measurement equipment. So as a connection, the possibility of changing the weight of a body in allophone experiments come from taking some data from UFOs. Now, interestingly, there are other methods for changing, for dynamically orienting the nuclei spin. And this can be done through sounds, but also through meditation. These are some claims which are somehow natural, knowing that there are some Tibetan monks that can lift rocks using musical instruments. So one could think that the microwave pulse was replaced by the sound waves, which can act somehow to maybe a piezoelectrical effect and orient the nuclei in the right direction to reduce gravity or even nullify it. At this stage, I wanted to show you a picture. So if we can switch to the share screen. Steve, thank you. You have a link in the Google Slides. A lot of instruments are placed at precise intervals and distances and angles from the rock, which eventually, after a while, starts to oscillate and lifts, like flying, and it's directed to some place on top of that higher cliff. They use big drums, medium drums, small drums, trumpeter. Now, Steve, if I can go back to the slides. Thank you. So the dynamic nuclear orientation of spins can be achieved through meditation. I am claiming by extrapolating the same phenomenon where we replace microwaves with sound, and then we replace sound with a meditation kind of action which somehow can alter one's body's say coherence, and maybe thinking of the involvement of the aura. And we can speculate that in this way we might be able to align spin directions in a coherent way, leading to levitation. Levitation is claimed in many cases, for instance, with church saints, Indian gurus, and other famous magicians. So a connection might be there, and it's worth trying to understand how this relates with the technological version. Also, it is known that sportives in real game conditions can jump much higher than in testing conditions. So again, it's tempting to think that because of the mental state and physical state of the sportive in actual game conditions, somehow either the results are more impressive, the muscles work better, and so on, or there is a change in the apparent weight, which, as we've seen, can be controlled in various ways. Now, this was in brief regarding gravity, and there are more explanations in the articles which can be found in the electronic archives. So let's briefly try to connect with cold fusions and see if understanding the structure of electric charges in protons and neutrons may be related to the presence of cold fusion. The claim is that cold fusion can be achieved in biological systems. This has been experimentally verified with chickens, that they can transmute elements into calcium, even if not present in the food they eat. I didn't include a reference, but this can be found on the web. So, biological systems can transmute elements at a temperature which is obviously high enough to be called cold fusion. Now, I'm attempting an explanation in terms of the electric flow of neutrons and protons, together with the electronic shells around the nuclei. The idea is that if we rearrange the directions of spin, so also we reorient the sources and sinks of each proton and neutron, then there may be some compensation yielding a lower Coulombian repulsion and a stronger possibly gravitational attraction. In this case, one can say entertain the idea that this may enable cold fusion. Again, the mathematical computations are not yet present, have not been done, so this remains just a theoretical possibility, but a very tempting and well-founded one. For more details, see the article Gravity and Cold Fusion on the web. Now, another point is the following. In what sense is the neutrino related to the graviton? Recall that neutron's electric structure, down, down, up, in terms of quarks, is the following. Looks like a Coulombian negative electric charge, Coulombian field due to a negative electric charge, plus a correction which has a given direction. Now, this is reminiscent of the beta decay of the neutron. Then one can start, I mean, it's a natural question to see, to ask if there is indeed a connection between these two. And more cannot be said at this stage. So I'll just move on and say that the beta decay in quark line diagrams form may suggest a correspondence between what gravity is and the presence of neutrino in elementary particle physics. This beta decay, it's pictured always in terms of pointwise particles. So it is maybe possible that when we look at structures which are not pointwise, like we have here in terms of quarks, then there may be no need for introducing a hypothetical neutrino, as Pauli did a long time ago, and for which is there is a huge literature in physics, but with only indirect evidence. Okay, so if there is a beta decay, what about the reverse? So if protons with their electron shells can be compressed into neutrons by this, and this I refer to as the reverse of beta decay, then it is conceivable that by rearranging the spin directions via dynamical nuclear orientation and redirecting and coupling the electromagnetic flows, then maybe this is possible, and this would be a way to have a catalytic process enabling cold fusion. In other words, again, if you couple the protons and electrons from the shell and have just neutrons in the nuclei for a short period of time, then there is no problem in putting together more neutrons from a second source, a second atom, and achieve cold fusion. The electronic shells should be thought of as vertices of truncated Platonic polyhedra. So again, here we point towards a possible connection with these Platonic polyhedra, instead of the usual harmonics in 3 dimensions given by Schrödinger equation. There are some operations which can alter, say, a cube into an octahedron and so on, which maybe are connected or related with the structure of orbitals. It's just a thing to point to think about. So how orbitals interact with the Platonic shapes of protons is another story to be told, not right now. And with this, I'll conclude by mentioning the main points. The so-called dynamic nuclear orientation of spins affects gravity and the positive and negative electric flow. And reorienting spin axes and reconfiguring the electric flow of electronic orbitals, protons, and neutrons, this affects the gravitational force, allowing to control gravity. It also conceivably enables compression of protons and electrons into neutrons, the inverse of beta decay. And if this is the case, then it's a catalytic process for cold fusion. About the Alzofon technology, his experiments are a clear and specific technological solution for controlling gravity. So this has been clearly done, proved, already existing in the 1980s. And Alzofon tried to find investors, tried to sell the point, but couldn't. And he didn't publish or made it public enough because he wanted to maintain priority and secrets. Obviously, at that time, he didn't. I'm not sure if he patented or not. Now, similar experiments are performed at Falcon Lab under the guidance of Mark Sokol. So take a look at his website and see much more about his experiments, similar to Alzofon experiments. The parameters needed to be investigated in detail. The frequency of the microwave, the gaps, the pulsing, the materials used, and so on. And I'll just mention that Alzofon used only aluminum, but there are many other materials which could be used, and probably many other frequencies, methods. Here I didn't mention, I forgot his name. If I recall later, I'll come back. Who obtained some very strange phenomena in his lab, Hutchison effect. But Hutchison did not document anything. He experimented somehow chaotically, so he couldn't tell exactly what was going on. So it is important to try to see if there are connections between Hutchison effect and his manipulations of microwaves and Alzofon experiments. And one last point, which I also mentioned to Mark at the last Tesla conference, is that Falcon Lab experiments, if they are better documented than in articles, then it would be valuable for the rest of us to see better what's going on at the theoretical and practical level without worrying too much about how you arrange the experiments. Now, as an epilogue, using dynamic nuclear orientation, one can control gravity and reduce the weight of a new generation of clean transportation vehicles. And everybody should think of Star Trek coming up soon on our skies in the next 10 or 20 years, maybe. And with this, I'll move to show a few references and conclude my presentation. Should I continue or leave 10 minutes for questions, comments, and so on?
Well, I haven't seen any questions pop up in the comments. If anyone has a comment, now would be the time to do it. Or you can go to the address I put down there, which is our studio lab, and you can get on in the show here. I'm pretty excited now about hopefully in the next couple of years here, we develop real anti-gravity, and we can only do that by engineering. And engineering is just not hands-on stuff. I mean, there's a lot of experimentation, but once you get the experiment done, then you got to be able to translate that into formulas and equations. Without math, there is no engineering.
Yeah. And also, if we only have the math, then we don't have the actual, objects. We don't know how to build them. I want to go back briefly. Actually, maybe not there. At alphaphone experiments and alphaphone technology, which is really the technology, say, borrowed from UFOs. Actually, not borrowed, but calibrated using what U.S. Aircraft measured chasing a UFO. So these experiments are well documented, and it's very important to try to reproduce them by several experimenters, several labs independently, and see if the results correspond. And then it's important to try to change the materials, change the frequencies, and so on, corresponding to the materials, and build a theory, a mathematical theory out of it, as Steve mentioned. Yes, Steve, go ahead if you have other.
Well, that's all the comments I have for right now. I'll be looking forward to seeing you at the conference this summer in Albuquerque, and I encourage everyone to sign up for that. It's a good chance to sit down and talk to people face to face. And sometimes these ideas that we put out there are pretty complex and everything, and you just have to grit your teeth and kind of work your way through the stuff, and then maybe meet people who are doing the work on it and talk to them to get a better concept of what's going on.
Yes,
that's
definitely.
when we have conferences.
Now, another thought, if I can go back to the slides, please, Steve. Is the idea that where is it? That meditation can affect the state of one person and lead to, if not levitation, but I'm trying to find what slide was it. Nope. So let's go to the meditation. Sorry, I'm missing the button. Oh. Okay, sounds and meditation. So it is interesting that even runners reported that there is a way to create a mental state where one thinks that you are really pulled by the head, by a hand, an invisible hand, and they feel that they become lighter. So there may be a way to mentally control the orientation of the spins, achieving a lighter state, lighter weight states in running, and also in other sports, basketball and so on. So who's interested might try to look into it and see if you can actually practice this, and knowing that it's possible at the fundamental level of elementary particles might give you an additional impetus or an additional belief that you can do it and improve the results in the exercises which leads to levitation. Go ahead, Steve.
I believe, like in sound, and this all gets back to quantum physics, where everything is interconnected, and sound is just another it's just another frequency, and our whole being just seems to be based upon frequencies, and our whole being is energy at certain frequencies, so
Yes.
So it would be not a surprise if they could meditate, and I believe that image you had, I believe that was also in our 1986 proceedings of the International Tesla Society, which I edited, by the way. But yeah, there's just so much information out there, and like I say, come to the conference and meet Lucian there, and I think that's about it for the night, huh?
Yes. Until then, try to read this and see if you can find more references regarding these points. Levitation through sounds and through meditation. And we'll discuss it at Tesla Tech.
Yeah, and I would also like to mention, like on our YouTube channel, we're now starting to put up the global science conferences, and there's a lot of material on using sounds for healing, and like these were done back in the early 90s, late 80s, and therefore you're getting really good source material there from people who actually did it back then. So, we might want to check it out, and that'll be up at our Tesla Tech YouTube site. Just go to teslatech.info and click on the YouTube. And thank you again, Lucian, for being our guest tonight.
Thank you for the invitation, Steve.
And we'll see you in August. Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye. And thank you all for coming, and hope to see you. Remember, if you sign up, become an exclusive member, it's $9.99 a month, and you're going to have access to literally thousands of DVDs. The past couple weeks, I've just been working on the 1992, 1993, and 1994 global science conferences, and I find them very intriguing. It just brings back memories because I've been to a lot of those conferences myself. So we also had the exotic research conferences and the extraordinary technology. Anyway, go take a look at them. And I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for coming. Bye.